Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Long after the catastrophic failures of the original Jurassic Park and the rise and fall of Jurassic World, humanity stood at a turning point where memory and ambition collided. The world had not simply forgotten the chaos unleashed on Isla Nublar and Isla Sorna. Those scars still lingered in documentaries, archives, lawsuits, and whispered legends, but a new generation had emerged, one that did not experience the terror firsthand. For them, dinosaurs were no longer monsters that broke free of cages. They were scientific marvels, extinct wonders reborn once before and now waiting to return again under new terms. Billion-dollar tech corporations, private defense labs, and government-backed research facilities quietly reignited conversations that the world once swore never to revive. They called this new initiative not a sequel, but a rebirth, branding it as a symbol of progress rather than hubris. But beneath polished slogans and glossy presentations, a dormant ambition stirred, the desire to control evolution itself. The first sparks of this new dawn began in silence. Hidden in the abandoned ruins of former InGen research vaults, long-forgotten genetic samples were rediscovered. Amber-encased insects, fossil marrow extractions, cryogenic embryos that somehow survived neglect and war. Scientists across multiple continents, funded by anonymous investors, competed in secrecy to rebuild the genetic codes with more precision than the pioneers before them. Artificial intelligence replaced outdated algorithms, quantum mapping allowed, gaps in dinosaur genomes to be filled with near perfection, and CRISPR-based mutation control offered the illusion of safety. The mistakes of Henry Wu and his predecessors were studied like sacred texts, not to avoid repeating them entirely, but to refine the path they carved. This new generation of researchers believed they were not resurrecting chaos, they were engineering order. Yet the hunger that drove these developments was not merely academic. The world had changed. Nations battled ecological collapse, species extinction, food shortages, and vanishing biodiversity. While some saw dinosaurs as a threat, others saw them as a solution. Imagine, they argued, a genetically stabilized herbivore species reintroduced into controlled island ecosystems to restore balance. Imagine apex predators used for population control in regions where invasive species destroyed forests. Imagine engineered genomes that could bring back ancient flora, healing lands ravaged by industry. The concept of Jurassic World Rebirth was not sold as entertainment this time. It was sold as salvation, and that made it far more dangerous. The first facility built under this new vision was not a theme park. It was an underground biosphere, buried in the cliffs of Patagonia, camouflaged by snow and silence. The project leaders named it Helix Station, a tribute to the spiral of DNA that redefined mankind's dominion over life. Here, teams of bioengineers and paleogeneticists worked under a new ethical charter, one that claimed mastery over the mistakes of the past. Hydro-powered security systems replaced electric fences, electromagnetic containment fields replaced cages, and behavior-mapped holographic environments were designed to calm hatchlings before they even opened their eyes. The facility's mission was simple in text but colossal in ambition: create life without risking it, or the world. The first successful embryo of the rebirth era was not a T-Rex, a velociraptor, or a hybrid monstrosity. It was a Liaoulinasaura, a small herbivorous dinosaur adapted to long winters, chosen for its intelligence, herd behavior, and minimal threat level. When it hatched under artificial dawnlight, its eyes opened not with the confusion of a predator, but the curiosity of a newborn creature unaware of human history. Scientists watched from behind transparent barriers, overwhelmed not by fear but awe. Cameras captured every twitch, every breath, every heartbeat, and the world, though it did not yet know, had just crossed the threshold of a new era. News of the success leaked sooner than expected, not through press conferences or official channels, but through whispers, encrypted files, and stolen footage monetized on the black market. The video of the hatchling, only 11 seconds long, spread through the digital underworld in hours. From there, it surfaced on private forums, fringe science podcasts, then mainstream speculation columns. Within a week, media outlets around the globe were buzzing. Are dinosaurs being created again? Has Isla Nublar's legacy returned? Is the Jurassic Age beginning anew? Governments denied involvement, corporations issued vague statements, and spokespeople labeled the footage a deep fake. But the world had seen enough to believe and enough to fear. With public attention rekindled, the stakes escalated. Helix Station expanded its operations, backed now by competing investors who saw both opportunity and threat. Within months, they bred 3 more species, a flock of Parasaurolophus, a small population of Protoceratops, and a meticulously gene-corrected strain of Compsognathus. Each was raised under a new philosophy, containment through symbiosis rather than domination. Their environments were crafted to mimic not just ancient ecosystems, but adaptive modern conditions. Cameras streamed data to satellites, AI trackers logged every interaction, thermal sensors read emotional responses, and drones monitored stress levels with precision. Yet, even in this era of precision and promise, the heart of the unknown lingered. Scientists realized something extraordinary. The creatures were not just living. They were adapting to human presence in ways unseen before. The Leaelinosaura formed bonds not out of fear, but recognition. Their eyes tracked human observers with startling intelligence, and their vocalizations shifted depending on the tone of the people around them. The Compsognathus developed complex pack behaviors earlier than projected, forming hierarchies more advanced than their fossil record suggested. The Parasaurolophus demonstrated vocal resonance that interfered with facility sensors, causing engineers to reassess containment protocols altogether. Evolution, it seemed, did not simply resume, it accelerated. Hidden in all this success was a quiet divide. Not all members of the scientific teams believed in the vision unconditionally. Some feared that even harmless species were only a stepping stone toward the resurrection of apex predators. Others worried that the investors, names hidden behind, offshore accounts and coded legal fronts, did not intend to stop at controlled sanctuaries. Some warned that the ecosystem of Earth was no longer the same as it was millions of years ago, and that no amount of predictive modeling could guarantee equilibrium. A few resigned, others stayed, hoping their presence would prevent ethical collapse, but the momentum of the project was already unstoppable. The true beginning of the new dawn came not with the first birth, but with the first debate. Nations convened emergency councils. Environmentalists clashed with biotech advocates. Economists warned of black market dangers, while philosophers questioned whether humanity was witnessing the return of nature or its final manipulation. The public remained divided. Some remembered the screams of Isla Nublar, while others saw only the wonder of life restored. Through all this, the dinosaurs themselves remained unaware of the world beyond steel, light, and simulated valleys. They ate, slept, moved, and watched with eyes that saw everything but understood nothing of their past or future. They were neither villains nor miracles. They were simply alive again. And in their breath, in the thunder of their hearts, in the trembling air around them, the world felt the first rumble of something vast awakening, not a repeat of history, but the rewriting of it. Because the dawn of prehistoric discovery was never about creation alone. It was about the moment humanity looked at life older than itself and asked not, "Can we control it?" but, "What comes next when the past returns to claim its place in the present?" And this time, the answer would not come in roars, but in consequences. The world of Jurassic World Rebirth opens in a reality where dinosaurs are no longer isolated phenomena. They are part of the global ecosystem. Cities, rural landscapes, oceans, national parks, and even border territories have all been reshaped by the spread of prehistoric species. Humans have been forced to adapt rapidly, creating a fragile balance between fear, survival, and reluctant coexistence. Governments across the world have set up specialized departments to track, contain, and respond to dinosaur-related incidents. Drones patrol migration zones, reinforced shelters exist in high-risk regions, and emergency alerts now include reports of rogue raptors, territorial ceratosaurs, or soaring pterosaurs drifting into populated zones. In some countries, laws prohibit killing dinosaurs except in self-defense, while others issue licenses for controlled hunting and relocation. Black markets thrive with illegal cloning labs, smuggling operations, and auction networks that mirror the events of Fallen Kingdom. Meanwhile, environmentalists argue for habitat sanctuaries, pushing for land reserves where dinosaurs can roam without human interference. The presence of herbivores like Triceratops and Parasaurolophus has altered agriculture and forest growth, with entire crop fields destroyed overnight by migrating herds. Apex predators like the Giganotosaurus and Allosaurus force communities to install electric barriers, thermal sensors, and sound deterrents. Even oceans are no longer safe. Creatures like the Mosasaurus have disrupted marine transport, fishing industries, and naval security. Humanity exists in a permanent state of tension. Dinosaurs don't recognize national boundaries, private property, or human authority. The planet is no longer exclusively ours. It has become a hybrid age where the Cretaceous and the modern era overlap. Jurassic World Rebirth uses this global transformation as the narrative backbone, showing not just isolated disaster scenarios but a long-term planetary shift. Every ecosystem is evolving, every society is adapting, and every mistake could lead to irreversible consequences in a world where humans are no longer guaranteed dominance. In Jurassic World Rebirth, humanity is no longer living in denial of the prehistoric threat. It is evolving in response to it. Homes, cities, transportation, and daily routines have been reshaped by the constant risk of dinosaur encounters. Suburban neighborhoods now resemble fortified zones, with motion-triggered barriers, reinforced glass, and underground panic rooms designed to withstand attacks from mid-sized predators like Utahraptors or Carnotaurus. Schools conduct evacuation drills not just for earthquakes or fires, but for airborne threats from pteranodons or sudden pack incursions. Children grow up knowing basic survival rules: avoid dense forests at dusk, travel in groups, and never leave food outside that could attract scavengers. In urban centers, towering sound fences emit low-frequency deterrents to keep large herbivores and predators at bay. Highways have become labyrinths of checkpoints and overpasses designed to prevent stampedes from blocking major roads. Wildlife migration forecasts appear on news broadcasts alongside weather updates. Economies have shifted too. Entire industries now revolve around dino-proof architecture, behavior research, tranquilizer technology, and non-lethal deterrent systems. Hunters and ex-military operatives work as licensed wranglers, tracking escaped species or rescuing civilians from high-risk zones. Some regions have taken a different approach, adapting rather than resisting. Communities living near herbivore-dominated areas have built elevated walkways and treehouse-style housing to avoid ground-level contact. Coastal populations monitor oceanic predators with acoustic mapping to prevent Mosasaurus attacks on fishing and shipping routes. In the black market, survivalist gear, illegal capture tech, and cloned hatchlings are trafficked for profit, creating moral and ethical conflicts. Despite the fear, human curiosity hasn't faded. Researchers establish remote observation towers, studying how dinosaurs are forming new migratory patterns and hierarchies. Some species begin to adapt to human presence, scavenging trash sites or inhabiting abandoned factories. Others remain purely wild and violently territorial. Religion and culture have also transformed, with some factions worshipping dinosaurs as forces of nature or symbols of planetary correction, while others blame them for an apocalyptic downfall. The human psyche carries constant tension, equal parts awe, dread, and responsibility. Survival in this world isn't about eliminating the threat, but learning how to exist within it without losing control or compassion. As dinosaurs spread beyond containment and become a permanent force of nature, the world's governments are forced to rethink how power, security, and sovereignty function in this new age. Jurassic World Rebirth presents a geopolitical landscape where every nation must confront the prehistoric reality, whether they embrace coexistence, enforce eradication, or exploit the creatures for power and profit. International summits now include dinosaur threat assessments alongside economic and climate discussions. The United Nations has formed a specialized division known as the Global Prehistoric Regulation Council, GPRC, tasked with tracking migrations, enforcing anti-cloning agreements, and coordinating emergency response plans for cross-border incursions. However, political disagreement fractures global cooperation. Some countries demand the extermination of apex predators, while others insist dinosaurs have become part of Earth's natural ecosystem and should be protected accordingly. Militaries have adapted their doctrines, creating hybrid task forces that combine advanced tech with animal behavior science. Tranquilizer drones, EMP nets, scaled-up taser cannons, and thermal tracking satellites are used in place of standard heavy artillery to avoid ecological backlash. Armored vehicles now come equipped with spiked plating to deter charging herbivores and retractable towers with sonic emitters to redirect migrating herds. Some governments secretly use dinosaurs as biological weapons, training velociraptors and smaller predators for covert operations, espionage disruption, or territorial defense in remote conflict zones. Rogue Black Ops units harvest DNA from hybrid species to engineer stronger, faster, or more controllable variants, igniting ethical debates about weaponizing nature. Diplomacy has evolved, too. Border patrols must account for migratory dinosaurs crossing national lines, leading to treaties similar to wildlife management agreements but enforced on an unprecedented scale. Remote islands, deserts, and decommissioned military bases have been transformed into controlled reserves or off-limit quarantine zones. Civilian protests erupt frequently, some demanding safety and culling rights, others fighting for sanctuary protections. Corporate influence complicates matters further, with biotech conglomerates lobbying for research rights and cloning patents under the guise of conservation or medical innovation. Governments walk a fragile line. Protect citizens, preserve ecosystems, and prevent another global disaster triggered by human greed. Militaries may possess the firepower to eliminate the threat, but they've learned from past failures. Direct confrontation often leads to catastrophic collateral damage. Instead, strategy, surveillance, and containment define modern warfare. Humanity stands at a crossroads where every policy decision could determine whether dinosaurs become integrated inhabitants of Earth or the architects of its next extinction-level event. In the world of Jurassic World Rebirth, the rise of dinosaurs has created not only global panic and adaptation, but also one of the most profitable and dangerous underground industries in human history. As governments scramble to maintain order, the black market thrives in the shadows, driven by greed, power, and scientific obsession. Smugglers, rogue scientists, corrupt officials, and private collectors form a vast criminal network dealing in everything from stolen embryos to live hatchlings and bioengineered hybrids. Secret cloning labs operate in abandoned bunkers, offshore freighters, desert compounds, and hidden jungle facilities, replicating the unethical operations once spearheaded by figures like Dr. Henry Wu. Illegal dinosaur trafficking mirrors past wildlife black markets, but on a far more catastrophic scale. Rare species like Deinonychus, Pyroraptors, and juvenile T-Rexes are auctioned to warlords, billionaires, and mercenary organizations willing to pay fortunes for biological weapons, exotic pets, or underground arena combat. Genetic brokers deal in designer DNA, offering hybrid combinations with increased aggression, camouflage ability, venom secretion, or enhanced intelligence. Some cartels crossbreed prehistoric species with modern animals, creating abominations that don't exist on any registry and can't be traced to legal sources. This criminal ecosystem extends into espionage, with corporate spies stealing research data, hacking bioservers, and bribing scientists to extract classified sequences. Transportation routes run through remote jungles, decommissioned ports and covert airstrips in unstable regions. Modified shipping containers hold sedated creatures under cryogenic conditions or suppressive gas fields to prevent detection. Mercenary teams escort convoys with shock rifles, tranquilizer firms, and drone suppression systems to combat both authorities and rogue predators attracted to scent trails. Wealthy private islands serve as illegal menageries where owners keep dinosaurs as status symbols, experimental subjects, or hunting trophies. Some even host blood sport events where modified raptors fight to the death for bets placed through encrypted networks. Meanwhile, disgraced geneticists and ex-InGen researchers continue unauthorized experiments. They claim to seek breakthroughs in medicine, agriculture, and defense, but most are driven by ego or financial desperation. Failed specimens are dumped into wilderness zones, feeding a cycle of new invasive species that elude tracking systems. Despite international bans and military crackdowns, the illegal trade only grows more complex and elusive. The stakes are higher than ever, not just for human safety, but for the fragile balance between nature and mutation. One escaped hybrid, one botched experiment, or one rogue buyer could destabilize entire regions. In Jurassic World Rebirth, the true threat isn't just the dinosaurs that walk the Earth, it's the humans who refuse to stop playing God. As dinosaurs have spread across every continent in Jurassic World Rebirth, their behavior has not remained frozen in prehistoric instinct. It has rapidly evolved in response to human environments, new food chains, climate differences, and unfamiliar predators, including humans themselves. Species that once roamed in isolated ecosystems millions of years ago now adapt to urban structures, artificial light, industrial noise, and modified terrains. Raptors that were once dependent on forest stalking have started using abandoned buildings, underground subway tunnels, and sewer systems as hunting corridors. Their intelligence, already high among prehistoric creatures, has sharpened around new strategies. Packs learn to avoid security drones, detour around electric fences, and use distraction tactics to separate human groups. In some regions, velociraptors and pyroraptors have formed hybrid social structures, merging packs for seasonal migrations or large-scale hunting events, demonstrating cooperative intelligence beyond what paleontologists expected. Herbivores like Parasaurolophus, Stegosaurus, and Iguanodon have altered their feeding routes to take advantage of farmlands, orchards, and even garbage dumps located near cities. Their digestion patterns shift based on exposure to processed crops, leading to changes in growth rates, herd mobility, and reproductive timing. Triceratops, once highly territorial, have started using roads and highways as migration paths because asphalt absorbs and radiates heat, making nighttime travel more efficient. Some species now follow train routes and coastal ports where food waste accumulates, becoming almost semi-domesticated in certain towns that illegally feed them as tourist attractions or for protection against predators. The most fascinating evolution has occurred among apex carnivores like the Tyrannosaurus rex, Giganotosaurus, and Allosaurus. These creatures have gradually reduced random hunting patterns in favor of observing human movements and routines. They linger near wildlife reserves, fisheries, suburbs bordering forests, and evacuation zones after learning that humans often leave injured dinosaurs, livestock, or waste behind. In snowy regions, some large predators have learned to conserve energy by trailing herds instead of direct pursuit, waiting for natural selection or human interference to weaken targets. The Mosasaurus and other marine predators have changed their migratory routes based on cargo ship traffic, coastal fish farms, and offshore oil rigs that create artificial reefs and congregation points for prey. Some sightings report that large marine reptiles attack only specific types of vessels, likely due to sound frequency, recognition, or learned association with food disposal at sea. Even defensive behaviors have evolved. Smaller dinosaurs like Compsognathus and Dilophosaurus travel in mixed scavenger pods, raiding campsites or trash sites like raccoon equivalents of the new era. Pteranodons and Quetzalcoatlus have altered nesting habits to favor rooftops of skyscrapers, oil rigs, suspension bridges, and cliffside tourist complexes, areas where wind currents boost flight efficiency. They have become more daring around aircraft, forcing airports to redesign airspace corridors and construct vertical deterrent towers. In dense urban areas, nighttime becomes the most dangerous period because many species have adapted their circadian rhythms to avoid daytime human activity and exploit darkness for movement, feeding, or nesting. Scientists studying this behavioral evolution have observed accelerated learning curves, suggesting that dinosaurs are capable of cross-generational adaptation far quicker than most assumed. Mothers teach hatchlings new avoidance signals, herd calls, and safe zones, while certain species vocalize in new patterns, possibly to warn others of humans, machinery, or drones. The rise of modified hybrids has further complicated ethology studies. Some illegally created dinosaurs possess semi-camouflage or enhanced night vision, giving them hunting advantages that disrupt established food webs. These hybrids alter behavior in other species too, pushing them into unfamiliar zones or triggering defensive alliances. Marine life has faced unusual shifts as well, with plesiosaur-like reptiles adapting to polluted waters and hunting near desalination pipelines where fish are trapped. Humid coastal cities have reported new nesting colonies of amphibious carnivores that don't match known fossil records, hinting at clandestine bioengineering influences. Forest ecosystems are undergoing silent wars between invasive dinosaurs and existing predators like wolves, bears, and big cats. Over time, many modern predators have learned to avoid direct confrontation, scavenging dinosaur leftovers instead. Elephants in certain reserves have altered migration to avoid conflict with large sauropods, while crocodiles follow smaller dinosaurs to rivers and wetlands for easier ambushes. Human interference also shapes behavior. Tranquilizer strikes, sonic repellents, electric net traps, and vocal mimicry technologies teach dinosaurs to identify, adapt, or counter these tactics. Some raptor species now disperse near drones to confuse tracking AI and regroup when the threat passes. Herd herbivores alter formations in response to helicopters, understanding elevation threat. Each interaction shifts the balance. Dinosaurs do not merely survive in the modern world. They are integrating themselves into it. They modify instincts based on surveillance patterns, migrate using artificial landscapes, and restructure power hierarchies as they encounter hybrids, competitors, and human resistance. In Jurassic World Rebirth, the evolution isn't just physical. It's intellectual, environmental, and strategic, signaling a future where dinosaurs don't just return. They adapt to conquer. They adapt to conquer. In the new age of Jurassic World Rebirth, humanity has been forced to reinvent how civilization functions by merging survival instincts with advanced technology, military innovation, urban redesign, and emergency planning built specifically around creatures that no longer belong to the past. Cities once built for traffic, tourism, and trade now operate like fortified habitats where humans are not the apex species, but a cautious participant in ecosystems reshaped by prehistoric dominance. Defense systems are no longer limited to guns, missiles, or lockdown protocols. They are multi-layered networks of sonic deterrence, magnetic barrier grids, aerial surveillance fleets, drone-operated tranquilizer systems, pheromone-based diversion strategies, rapid response extraction teams, armored wildlife relocation convoys, and predictive AI that maps herd movement, migration paths, and nest expansion. Entire industries have emerged around dinotech, a global sector focusing on innovation in containment, protection, research, biosurveillance, and controlled cohabitation. Sonic fences, once used experimentally in Isla Nublar facilities, are now scaled to protect city perimeters, highways, residential sectors, and farming zones. These barriers emit subsonic and high-frequency sound waves specifically tuned to repel different species, deep resonance to ward off sauropods, mid-frequency pulses to deter raptors and ceratosaurs, and sharp oscillations for airborne predators like pteranodons and Quetzalcoatlus. But these technologies are not perfect. Over time, dinosaurs begin to adapt or learn avoidance behaviors, leading to rotating signal patterns and upgraded oscillation matrices to reduce habituation. On the ground, armored electric mesh fences replace traditional walls and gates, integrated with pressure-triggered tranquilizer darts, automated floodlights, and vibration sensors that detect movement before visual contact. Urban planning transforms drastically. Skyscrapers receive reinforced glass paneling and retractable emergency shutters to block aerial infiltration. Underground metro systems include biometric access hatches and sliding glass doors capable of trapping or blocking creatures that enter tunnels. Suburbs feature elevated walkways, steel rampart corridors between buildings, and concealed bunkers beneath residential blocks. Rooftops host drone hangars and thermal observation posts, allowing rapid response to breaches or roaming predators. Even vehicles evolve. Civilian cars in high-risk areas have retractable armor plating, emergency EMP net launchers, sound deterrent horns, and onboard radar that detects large moving masses. Public transport fleets use roof-mounted sonic cannons, sturdy hull casings, and reinforced tires capable of crossing rough terrain in evacuation scenarios. For rural zones and farmland, governments and private sectors install migration redirection corridors, vast fenced-off paths filled with pheromone dispersal stations that lure herbivores and smaller predators away from human settlements toward designated safe ecosystems. Farmers abandon traditional fencing and rely instead on elevated crop platforms, automated protection drones, and genetically modified plants that emit natural deterrent odors when trampled or bitten. Some regions deploy decoy livestock drones that move in grazing patterns to distract carnivorous species away from villages or ranching zones. Law enforcement. Agencies evolve into divisions of specialized anti-dino units, trained in non-lethal containment, rescue operations, emergency relocation, and tactical suppression. These teams ride armored transports equipped with dart cannons, fold-out energy shields, high-pressure sedation gas grenades, and anti-drone countermeasures to combat black market poachers who provoke dinosaur behavior. Military forces create hybrid command structures in which soldiers work alongside field biologists, ethologists, and drone pilots to reduce collateral destruction. Instead of launching missiles or conventional strikes, modern responses rely on layered intervention, drone reconnaissance to identify species and numbers, sonic zone activation to isolate the threat, tranquilizer bombardment from aerial carriers, and robotic carriers to transport sedated dinosaurs to quarantine sanctuaries. Experimental tech includes pheromone cannons that simulate calls of dominant predators to disperse herds non-violently, exosuits for field operatives to withstand direct combat or trampling, and AI-assisted helmets that analyze roars to classify aggression levels in real time. Drones themselves become ubiquitous, ranging from small scouts that trace nests and footprints to heavy lifter drones that haul nets or administer injections from above. Autonomous rescue bots patrol forests and abandoned towns, detecting civilians and guiding them to safe zones using heat mapping and sonar. Yet defense isn't the only focus. Coexistence strategies become a necessity, not a choice. Some humans advocate for balance rather than eradication, leading to the establishment of controlled sanctuaries, migration bridges, and river containment zones where dinosaurs can roam without crossing into human regions. Urban green belts are repurposed into transit forests, monitored by AI fences that allow herbivores to move seasonally without contact with residential districts. Research communities work tirelessly to decode behavioral signals, communication roars, and pack hierarchy to predict when species will shift territory or react to resource shortages. Schools teach children evacuation drills, species recognition, and safe route navigation. Wildlife education channels broadcast daily updates on herd movements, conflict zones, and environmental alerts. Corporations invest in ecodomes, massive enclosed reserves built with climate control, artificial rivers, and feeding stations to relocate aggressive or endangered species. Diplomatically, insurance policies, building codes, and emergency services are rewritten to factor in prehistoric threats. Tourism adapts too. Armored safari towers and drone-guided observation pods float above designated wildlife corridors, ensuring thrill without casualty. At the same time, the illegal exploitation of technology creates new complications. Poachers hack sanctuary fences, militias weaponize tranquilizer drones for abductions, and rogue labs modify DNA sequences to create controllable or commercially valuable hybrids. In response, cyber defense networks safeguard facility mainframes, and biometric encryption locks down genetic archives. Satellites and orbital scanners track migration via heat signatures and tagged species markers. AI-controlled warning systems integrate with citizen apps, sending alerts to homes when nearby activity is detected. Coastal defense relies on sonar barriers, rotating buoy fences, underwater drones, and electrified nets to prevent marine reptiles from attacking ports, fisheries, and trade routes. Airspace defense includes reflective balloon nets to disorient flying reptiles and automated gliders that herd them away from cities. Emergency management centers simulate disaster scenarios daily, training response teams to handle stampedes, swarm attacks, or pack sieges. Coexistence extends into culture, economics, and psychology. People accept strict curfews during migration months. Religious groups interpret the return of dinosaurs as divine correction or historical reckoning. Architects design perch-safe skyscrapers with spiked or sloped rooftops to prevent nesting. In flood-prone zones, floating neighborhoods shield residents from charging land carnivores. Communities integrate silent alarm grids into the ground that vibrate floors if nearby motion exceeds threshold limits. Even entertainment evolves. VR training simulations teach civilians how to survive different dinosaur encounters, while documentaries replace myths with practical awareness. Governments regulate anti-poaching patrols, sanctuary expansions, and compensation programs for destroyed property. Diplomatic treaties govern transcontinental incidents when migrating dinosaurs cross political borders. Some nations push for global DNA amnesty, banning cloning altogether, while others secretly invest in hybrid breeding to maintain strategic defense leverage. Ultimately, technology and defense evolve not to eliminate dinosaurs, but to hold the line between survival and surrender. Coexistence becomes a reluctant partnership where humans adapt architecture, transportation, agriculture, and militaries to withstand a world no longer ruled by logic alone. The struggle isn't about domination, it's about engineering a future where two apex eras share the same planet without collapsing under the weight of fear and destruction. In the world of Jurassic World Rebirth, the greatest transformation is not only seen in technology, cities, or law, it is carved into the human mind, reshaping emotions, culture, identity, and the collective understanding of existence. From the moment dinosaurs reclaimed the Earth, the psychological fabric of humanity began to fracture and rebuild itself in unpredictable ways. Children are now born into a world where bedtime warnings aren't about monsters under the bed, but real raptors outside reinforced fences. Fear becomes a normalized emotion, woven into daily life just like hunger or fatigue. Entire generations grow up hearing distant roars instead of traffic horns, learning evacuation drills before alphabets, and accepting that fields, forests, and coastlines no longer belong solely to humans. Adults who once felt safe in urban permanence now live with a constant sense of vulnerability, knowing that survival depends not only on infrastructure, but on unpredictable ancient instincts revived in modern landscapes. Anxiety becomes global and generational. Psychologists coin new terms like Cretaceous trauma, apex anxiety disorder, and roar response reflex, as people flinch at thunderclaps, distant tremors, and midnight alerts that signal nearby dinosaur movement. Therapy centers are built with underground safe rooms so sessions aren't interrupted by external threats. Families reinforce homes not just for storms, but for impact shock from herding herbivores or prowling carnivores that wander near the edges of towns. Even holidays and festivals are rescheduled around migratory seasons, as mental routines adapt to survival rhythms. Religion evolves, too. Some believe the return of dinosaurs is proof of divine judgment or planetary reset. New cults worship dinosaurs as living gods, seeing their dominance as proof that humanity was never meant to rule the earth unchecked. Services shift from churches to secured sanctuaries where prayers mix with drills, and spiritual leaders preach coexistence with creatures that existed long before human faiths were ever imagined. Others fall into nihilism, believing extinction is inevitable, and their identity collapses under the weight of insignificance. The human ego, once centered on technology, progress, and supremacy, now competes with living relics of the Mesozoic era that remind people their time at the top has always been borrowed. Cities that once defined modern identity, symbols of culture, money, and pride, now behave like camps in enemy territory. Skyscrapers are mental cages as much as physical shelters. People hesitate to travel to rural areas, beaches, forests, or mountain towns, fearing unseen movement in trees, water, or shadows. Tourism collapses, replaced by regulated safe zone vacations within shielded domes or floating resorts protected by surveillance submarines and sonar nets. Social media becomes a coping weapon. People share survival footage, roar recordings, evacuation stories, and conspiracy theories about hybrids, government bioweapons, and secret islands. Viral trends show kids naming herbivores outside their towns, while others post warning clips of raptor shadows moving behind broken streetlights. Some communities find unity in fear, turning trauma into solidarity. Neighbors organize watch shifts, supply exchanges, and underground education circles. Others tear apart under pressure, hoarding resources, blocking roads, and blaming outsiders for attracting dinosaur activity. International mental health programs emerge, broadcasting psychological survival guides on holoscreens and radio frequencies, teaching breathing techniques alongside escape protocols. Schools don't just grade math and science. They measure focus levels during simulated dino emergencies and teach children how to identify fear triggers without freezing. Even language changes. People stop saying, "if something happens," and replace it with, "when something happens." Identity no longer revolves around careers, dreams, or personal achievements as much as the question, can you protect the ones you love when the world shakes under prehistoric footsteps? Some embrace the new era, building pride around adaptation and resilience. Others lose grip on who they are in a world where humans are not the narrative's center anymore. Humanity slowly realizes that psychological evolution is now as necessary as technological evolution, because to share the planet with apex predators from another era, humans must rewire the mind before they can ever reclaim a sense of destiny. In Jurassic World Rebirth, the foundation of the story begins years after the catastrophic fall of the original Jurassic World theme, Park and the worldwide controversy that followed, the events of Fallen Kingdom. Governments, corporations, private biotech investors, and shadow organizations have all had their own agendas, which led to scattered dinosaur populations across multiple continents. The public has grown fearful yet fascinated, sparking documentaries, illegal trading, underground fighting rings, black market labs, and extremist animal rights groups that want to protect dinosaurs at any cost. The world is no longer dealing with a contained island experiment. Humanity is living with prehistoric predators in deserts, jungles, valleys, suburbs, caves, abandoned cities, and even remote mountain regions. Amid this chaos, a powerful multinational research company known as Genesis Biosystems secretly launches Project Rebirth, a plan to collect remaining species, repair their damaged DNA lines, and create a new controlled ecosystem that combines cutting-edge AI containment, drone surveillance, bioengineered habitats, and genetically enhanced anti-predator security. But the hidden truth is much darker. Genesis Biosystems aims to weaponize selected dinosaurs, sell hybrid embryos to rival governments, and build illegal prehistoric reserves for the ultra-wealthy elite. At the same time, scattered survivors of the original Jurassic teams, scientists, trainers, security specialists, and ethical geneticists discover fragments of encrypted files, rogue shipping containers, and strange sightings of never-before-seen creatures. Reports describe new species with advanced problem-solving abilities, adaptive camouflage, venomous traits, and coordinated hunting behavior that suggest intentional manipulation, not natural evolution. As the world unknowingly shifts toward another disaster, rumors spread of a massive hidden facility located deep inside a reclaimed island protected by storms and reinforced military outposts. This island is said to be a resurrection zone, where dinosaurs are being bred not just for exhibition, but for dominance and control, turning the concept of reviving the past into a future war for biological power. The ethical debate ignites in international courts, but secret deals and corporate espionage bury the truth under layers of legal silence. Meanwhile, wildlife experts in Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia document rising death tolls among livestock, disappearing villagers, and entire forest regions transformed into unknown migration corridors. Satellite footage reveals heat signatures of massive creatures moving in coordinated clusters, almost like armies preparing for territorial conquest. Jurassic World Rebirth begins from this global uncertainty, where humans no longer lead the food chain and where the rebirth of something ancient threatens to rewrite evolution itself. As the world adjusted to the irreversible spread of prehistoric creatures, a fundamental divide emerged among nations, organizations, and surviving communities. Should the planet be reshaped into sanctuaries where humans and dinosaurs coexist under delicate balance, or transformed into militarized zones where survival depends on eliminating or weaponizing these ancient giants? In regions like Canada, New Zealand, and Scandinavia, heavily forested and sparsely populated territories were converted into massive bioreserves where governments attempted to track and study dinosaur populations rather than eradicate them, using drones, AI surveillance, and tranquilizer networks to guide herds away from human settlements. Indigenous communities, who had long histories of coexistence with wildlife, negotiated rights to manage some of these zones, arguing that humanity's greatest failure was its refusal to understand the creatures it resurrected. On the other side of the divide, war-torn and densely populated regions such as parts of the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Central America began converting entire cities into fortified compounds, turning abandoned suburbs into kill zones where automated turrets, EMP fences, artillery drones, and electrified barricades attempted to hold off waves of migrating predators. Former national borders lost meaning as new maps were drawn based on territory claimed by apex carnivores or secured by militarized human enclaves, and in many places the line between defense and exploitation blurred as private. Armies and defense contractors began capturing raptors and hybrids to sell as living weapons. Black site research facilities hidden in deserts, jungles, and Arctic bunkers continued genetic experimentation, engineering dinosaurs that could be controlled through neural implants, pheromone codes, and shock collars, creating a new arms race where the superpowers of the postmodern world no longer relied solely on missiles or drones, but on bio-engineered creatures bred for stealth, siege, or destruction. Meanwhile, activist factions like the New Eden Coalition, the Paleos Project, and Earth Reclamation Front began rescuing eggs and moving herds to protected biospheres, arguing that dinosaurs were the rightful inheritors of Earth, and that humans must adapt by retreating into eco-cities built above ground or underground, without attempting to tame the wild domains now ruled by prehistoric instincts. Cities like Tokyo, Berlin, and Dubai proposed hybrid coexistence models where controlled sanctuaries were installed at the edges of metropolitan zones, offering research, tourism, and limited free-roaming corridors where herbivores could graze under heavy supervision. Yet incidents of breakout trampled neighborhoods, toppled highways, and caused political outrage from citizens who demanded zero-tolerance extermination. Policies, religious leaders in several cultures began interpreting the rise of dinosaurs as a spiritual reckoning or divine consequence of human arrogance, and in some regions, large herbivores like brachiosaurs and Parasaurolophus were treated as sacred symbols and guarded with ceremonial reverence. However, these sanctuaries often came under attack during food shortages, as rogue militias saw opportunity in selling meat, bones, or captured hatchlings to the black markets thriving in underdeveloped territories. The United Nations attempted to establish a global framework called the Bio-Wildlife Accord, proposing separate sanctuary continents, relocation treaties, and no-conflict zones. But political powers like the Neo-States Alliance and Eastern Defense Bloc blocked agreements, insisting that any containment strategy must allow for defensive strikes and hybrid research. In the oceans, the divide was even more chaotic. While marine sanctuaries off South America and the Indian Ocean were designated as prehistoric corridors to study creatures like mosasaurs, tylosaurs, and prehistoric sharks, military fleets treated deep-sea hunters as hostile threats and launched submarine war campaigns, resulting in sunken warships, crippled coastal economies, and radioactive contamination zones where creatures mutated further. The younger generation, growing up in this fractured reality, split into ideological factions, some trained as wildlife rangers, genetic engineers, and sanctuary custodians, while others enlisted in private defense corps armed with railgun rifles, exosuits, and tether drones engineered to immobilize carnivores in urban warfields. Across South Africa, Chile, and Russia, remnants of old mining towns became underground sanctuaries where humans coexisted with small dinosaur populations in carefully monitored cave biomes, using light tunnels, plant hybrids, and repurposed geothermal vents to build symbiotic ecosystems. But in failed states and collapsed economies, dinosaurs became both predators and currency. Bandits traded raptor teeth for fuel. Smugglers used ankylosaurus herds to breach armored trains, and hybrid trackers led mutant packs into enemy territories as living siege engines. Some scientists warned that the longer the species remained in conflict zones, the faster they would evolve under pressure, resulting in smarter, faster, and more aggressive generations capable of overrunning humanity within decades. At the same time, climate change accelerated the chaos, thawing ancient parasites and altering migration paths as cold-adapted species like cryolophosaurs invaded alpine villages and sabotaged ski regions and hydroelectric plants. Satellite images showed entire mountain ranges reshaped by wandering sauropods and carnivore pack wars, while abandoned megacities like Detroit, Wuhan, and Sao Paulo became overgrown labyrinths where dinosaurs nested among ruins of industry and skyscrapers. Some speculated that within a century, humans would only exist in shielded arcologies guarded by AI towers, while the rest of Earth transitioned into a neo-prehistoric biosphere. Others believed coexistence was not only possible but necessary, pushing for advanced communication attempts using sound-mimicking drones, neurotranslation implants, and bio-coded signals designed to redirect herds instead of confronting them. The divide hardened when incidents like the Manila Stampede, the Andes Rift Massacre, and the Riyadh Sky Nest disaster went viral. Millions watched as pteranodons swarmed rooftops, raptors infiltrated bunker hospitals, and Spinosaurus hybrids wrecked armored convoys on live broadcast. Governments that once advocated sanctuaries were forced by public fury to deploy kill squads and drone bombers, while sanctuary factions accused them of triggering extinction-level retaliation. Humans began to realize that the greatest question of their era was no longer how to survive the dinosaurs, but whether they would choose to share the planet as stewards, retreat into fortified isolation, or ignite a war that neither species might win. In the chaotic new era shaped by the coexistence and conflict of prehistoric creatures and the remnants of human civilization, powerful alliances and underground rebel factions began to rewire the world's political balance, transforming the planet into a chessboard of ideology, survival, and bioweapon supremacy. Former world superpowers that once commanded conventional militaries now struggled to unify their fractured populations, forcing them to merge resources with independent city-states. private defense networks, and corporate enclaves skilled in biotechnology, drone warfare, and neural link reconnaissance. The global human coalition, formed by a fragile partnership between what remained of the European Union, select North American provinces, and surviving Asian tech cities, advocated a controlled coexistence strategy, fortressing human zones with anti-dino defense grids while capturing or redirecting dangerous species through pheromone manipulation, sonic disruptors, and engineered herd migration paths. But their approach quickly clashed with the Dominion Vanguard, a militaristic faction born out of disbanded armies, warlords, and mercenary syndicates who believed dinosaurs should either be exterminated or repurposed as frontline bioweapons to reclaim territories and expand their influence over dwindling natural resources. In parallel, the rise of the rogue faction known as the Paleo-Rebirth Front destabilized global politics even further. This coalition of radical ecologists, disgruntled scientists, anti-government defectors, and black market geneticists believed that humans had forfeited the planet through centuries of destruction and exploitation, and that dinosaurs represented a biological reboot of Earth's hierarchy. They initiated covert operations to free captured species, sabotage containment zones, and release engineered hybrids into urban sprawls, hoping to force governments into retreat and accelerate the reclamation of Earth by ancient life. Their bases, hidden in caves, abandoned megastructures, frozen fortresses, and volcanic islands, served as both sanctuaries and military hubs where predators were raised like war beasts and herbivores were redirected to collapse agricultural economies. Meanwhile, megacorporations with deep roots in bioengineering, like Helix Core Industries, Ardentis Biotech, and the infamous InGen Remnant, evolved into shadow governments with private armies, controlling trade routes, manipulating gene patents, and selling cloned dinosaurs to the highest bidder. They forged secret pacts with isolationist human cities in exchange for security, weapons, and access to genetic vaults recovered from fallen labs across Antarctica, Madagascar, and the Amazon basin. As the old United Nations collapsed under diplomatic paralysis, a new underground council known as the Neutral Accord tried to mediate between warring groups, offering safe corridors for refugees, negotiating dino truce zones, and attempting to establish communication treaties between species using advanced vocal mimicry technologies and AI-driven translation implants. But their influence was under constant threat by both elimination squads and extremist eco-militias. Coastal regions faced added turmoil as amphibious hybrids and marine reptiles clashed with naval remnants, while pirate fleets began capturing mosasaurs and plesiosaurs to use as naval siege beasts against rival human fleets or floating fortress cities. In the skies, the emergence of winged biohybrids with metallic exoskeletal features and swarm intelligence disrupted air travel, drone patrols, and satellite networks, enabling dino factions and rebel humans to sabotage communications and seize control of resources without detection. Civilian populations trapped between these competing powers were forced to adapt in brutal ways. Some joined techno-cities, shielded by dome barriers and electrified skylines, trading personal freedom for safety. Others disappeared into underground tunnel networks, retrofitted subway systems, and mountain citadels where dinosaur behavior was studied to predict migration or manipulate hunting patterns. Black markets flourished with the trade of cloned embryos, venom glands, and dino-resistant armor, while nomadic tribes emerged across deserts, tundras, and jungles, living in temporary camps designed to move before large predators arrived. The psychological evolution of humanity split society further. One generation saw dinosaurs as the enemy to be eradicated, another saw them as inevitable rulers, and a third saw opportunity in merging the strengths of both through cybernetically enhanced bonding, genetic fusion experiments, and armor-assisted companion predation. As climate shifts intensified and ancient species migrated across fault lines in search of new nesting grounds, entire mountain ranges and coastlines became battlegrounds where human rebels ambushed corporate convoys transporting eggs, and hybrid raptor packs raided settlements aligned with the Dominion Vanguard. The lines between ally and enemy blurred when sanctuaries began harboring both humans and dinosaurs side by side, defended by scientists, indigenous scouts, and rogue soldiers who defected from larger factions in hopes of forging a balanced world rather than repeating cycles of dominance and extinction. But for every progressive experiment in coexistence, new attacks, betrayals, and hybrid monstrosities reignited the chaos. Whispers spread of a forthcoming global clash known as the Apex War, where alliances would either unite under a shared survival doctrine or shatter entirely as humanity and dinosaurs descend into the final struggle for control of the planet's future. From the moment humanity first tampered with prehistoric genomes, the seeds of hybrid evolution were already sown. But what began as controlled experimentation in lab environments quickly spiraled into a global arms race once dinosaurs spread across continents and governments lost regulatory power over genetic technology. In the aftermath of Isla Nublar and subsequent collapses of containment efforts, abandoned research data, stolen embryos, and unsecured cryostorage vaults fell into the hands of private militaries, rogue scientists, extremist environmental coalitions, and black market bioengineers who viewed genetics not as a scientific pursuit, but as a pathway to power, dominance, and ecological reset. Early hybrids like the Indominus Rex and Indoraptor had proven the catastrophic potential of accelerated gene splicing, camouflage integration, and predator intelligence. But the new era of hybrid warfare broke past those limits, fusing DNA from apex carnivores, venomous reptiles, adaptive amphibians, cephalopods, and even scavenger birds to craft organisms not bound by prehistoric instinct alone, but programmed with strategic aggression, environmental resilience, and heightened biological autonomy. Some factions engineered hybrids capable of surviving chemical assaults, EMP bursts, and cryogenic traps, while others focused on creating silent infiltrator strains with night vision, heat masking, and sonar disruption organs that neutralized human detection systems. Underground labs operating beneath collapsed cities, remote islands, polar stations, and volcanic networks experimented with neural implants, pheromone triggers, and hive mind synchronization among raptor variants, allowing entire packs to operate with coordinated precision equal to human strike teams. Corporate entities like Helix Core and Ardentis Biotech sold classified gene sequences to private defense syndicates, who then produced custom hybrid classes based on terrain requirements. Desert hunters with moisture retention and infrared tracking, aquatic leviathans with pressure-adaptive armor plating, mountain climbers with reinforced talons and gliding membranes, and jungle stalkers whose skin could alter pigment at a molecular level to merge with dense vegetation. Meanwhile, environmental radicals modified herbivore DNA to produce hyper-territorial behaviors, enabling species like Triceratops or Stegoceratops hybrids to charge at military installations and bulldoze armored vehicles with unstoppable kinetic force. These living war machines were not just biological anomalies, they were strategic assets, smuggled across borders in cryocapsules hidden inside cargo submarines, freight haulers, and aerostat transports outfitted with decoy biosigns to bypass early warning networks. As arms races intensified, scientists loyal to various governments tried to regain control by developing counter-hybrids, guardians engineered to track and neutralize rogue species, using scent-coded aggression triggers and acoustic command patterns. Some were embedded with reinforced neural chips linked to handler implants, allowing squads to deploy living weapons that could distinguish friend from foe based on pheromone markers and biometric tags. But these systems were far from perfect. When networks were hacked or interference scrambled signals, entire packs defected mid-operation, turning on their own controllers with devastating ferocity. At the same time, eco-anarchist factions like the Paleos Project sabotaged anti-hybrid research and released data dumps exposing illegal labs, sparking public outrage and fueling black market demand for evolutionary upgrades. Markets for hybrid eggs and gene splices operated through encrypted dark grid auctions, where buyers offered weapons, territory rights, rare metals, or human captives in exchange for next-generation apex life forms. In regions devastated by hybrid infestations, cities transformed into biohazard war zones where feral crossbreeds prowled sewer tunnels, subways, factories, and abandoned ports. Hybrid pterosaurs with enhanced muscle density and stealth membranes ambushed aircraft near megacity skylines, while venomous raptor strains with regenerative tissue and segmented armor raided fortified compounds with terrifying adaptability. Some spliced species inherited latent traits from cuttlefish, chameleons, and electric eels, granting them the ability to emit electromagnetic pulses, paralyze prey with neurotoxin vapor, or melt into shadowy caverns undetected. Yet the greatest threat emerged when gene labs began merging intelligence enhancers sourced from avian cognition studies and octopus neuroplasticity into dinosaur hybrids, resulting in creatures capable of long-term memory, trap setting, and strategic planning independent of human oversight. Entire valleys, islands, and mountain ranges fell under hybrid dominion as packs formed hierarchies and established territorial networks, marking zones with biochemical signals that repelled or attracted other species. In some areas, hybrids domesticated lesser dinosaurs, driving herds like cattle or weaponizing herbivores to trample human settlements. The line between natural evolution and artificial design collapsed when mutations began occurring without human intervention. Spores, parasites, and viruses adapted to hybrid physiology gave rise to symbiotic ecosystems where flora and fauna co-evolved with engineered dinosaurs, producing carnivorous vines that responded to raptor calls, fungal armor that bonded to scales, and insect swarms that acted as living scouts or decoys. Humans who stumbled into these zones described them not as jungles, deserts, or tundras, but as alien realms governed by rules of survival that humanity could no longer interpret or dominate. To counter the threat, the Dominion Vanguard and several breakaway military nations deployed their own experimental units, cybernetically enhanced dinosaurs fused with ballistic plating, tactical sensors, and AI-driven targeting protocols. These biomech hybrids were trained in kill zones using VR environment conditioning and synaptic correction, turning them into siege beasts unleashed against rival territories or rogue hybrid nests. Cities like New Berlin, Fortress Kyoto, Neo Johannesburg, and Arctic Bastion constructed hybrid command divisions armed with remote-piloted dino drones, flamethrower gauntlets, mech harpoons, and pulse nets designed to incapacitate or capture enemy bioweapons. At the same time, genetic peacekeepers attempted to negotiate fragile truces by sterilizing aggressive species, or inserting gene locks that limited reproduction in conflict zones. But as hybrid populations outpaced containment, desperation led to battlefield releases of experimental weapons that triggered ecological chain reactions, spore storms that mutated plant DNA overnight, viral clouds that turned scavengers into cannibalistic berserkers, and nanobot-infused parasites that reprogrammed hybrid physiology to target specific factions. In hidden desert citadels and subglacial caverns, elite scientists from marginalized nations formed the Gene Sovereignty Network, a rogue coalition determined to reclaim biological destiny from corporate and militarized powers. They argued that the only way forward was to engineer balance, creating guardian hybrids designed to maintain ecological order, cleanse overrun zones, and mediate between humanity and reptilian resurgence. These guardians were encoded with empathy inhibitors to minimize unnecessary predation, territorial instincts linked to environmental sensors, and anti-war pheromones that disrupted the aggression of hostile species. Still, their creations were hunted by both sides, by militarists seeking domination and by extremists seeking total liberation from human interference. As hybrid warfare escalated, global communication fractured into encrypted clusters where news of victories, outbreaks, and catastrophes spread through pirate radio, drone couriers, and darknet feeds. Some reported sightings of Omega-class hybrids, legendary apex constructs rumored to possess cognitive intelligence on par with humans, capable of learning languages, disarming traps, and commanding multi-species armies across regions. Whether myth or reality, these stories fueled panic and ambition alike, pushing factions to accelerate their own genetic arms races while civilians hid behind bioshield domes, cryo-bunkers, and subterranean havens. The final stage of this evolutionary conflict loomed as whispers of a global convergence event, where hybrid species would no longer remain tools of war but become sovereign entities with agendas and hierarchies beyond human control. Genetic warfare had not merely reshaped battlefields, it had rewritten existence itself, transforming Earth into a contested womb of countless futures, where the next dominant intelligence might roar, stalk, glide, or walk on two legs wearing the legacy of both the ancient past and the reckless ambition of human hands. After the first global wave of dinosaur incursions shattered the illusion of centralized stability, the foundations of old world governments began to collapse faster than any economic crisis, world war, or pandemic in recorded history, because this time the threat wasn't ideological, territorial, or technological, it was existential and uncontrollable, emerging from every forgotten jungle, shattered city, melting tundra, flooded delta, and desert outpost where rogue creatures or hybrid species had taken root. Parliamentary systems lost authority when citizens realized their leaders could not protect them from apex predators stalking highways and farmlands, nor from bioengineered raptors infiltrating military bases, nor from pterosaur flocks capable of tearing through aircraft and power grids with swarm precision. Democracies fractured into emergency councils and militia-controlled districts. Monarchies retreated into isolated fortress citadels patrolled by mech guardians and electrified barriers, while authoritarian regimes either weaponized captured dinosaurs or were wiped out within months by stampedes, sabotage, famine, or internal rebellion led by deserters who no longer believed in flags or constitutions. Entire nations dissolved without formal declarations. Borders vanished under migrating herds. Governments in exile hid in offshore platforms or mountain bunkers, and the concept of national identity faded as survival demanded new alliances based on territory, skill, resource access, and adaptability to coexisting or battling prehistoric dominance. In the ruins of once mighty capitals like Washington, London, Beijing, Moscow, New Delhi, São Paulo, and Cairo, power vacuums spawned competing authorities, warlord coalitions, technocrat enclaves, sanctuary councils, corporate protectorates, underground republics, and dynasties formed by families controlling water, food, gene tech, or weaponized hybrids. Cities with strong infrastructure adapted by sealing districts with kinetic fences, ultraviolet deterrent grids, drone sentries, quake-resistant bunkers, and biodome corridors linking transit hubs to hydroponic farms and sheltered housing complexes. Others fell and became dino wildlands. New Orleans overrun by amphibious predators nesting in sunken districts, Johannesburg split between mech-guarded highlands and hybrid-infested mine tunnels. Istanbul divided along the Bosphorus by factions using chemical fog barriers to redirect carnivores away from human safe zones, and Sydney abandoned after coastal mosasaurs and flying reptiles obliterated naval strongholds and communication lines. In places where food scarcity, panic, and economic collapse hit hardest, desperate populations formed herd cities, traveling in caravans of armored transports, scavenging tech, and mobile habitats fortified with shock lances, flame pods, pheromone decoys, and sound cannons designed to deter large predators. As old governments disintegrated, three major power archetypes emerged: sanctuary nations, which prioritized coexistence through controlled habitats and scientific regulation; dominion states, which focused on militarized suppression and exploitation of dinosaurs as bioweapons or labor assets; and hybrid sovereignties, which embraced a world reshaped by evolution and sought to merge human and prehistoric ecosystems under new codes of law, survival, and territory. Sanctuary nations like Aurora North, formed from remnants of Canada, Greenland, and Scandinavia; Boreal New Kyoto, a fortified biomegacity in northern Japan; and the Andean Shield Federation, stretching across Peru, Ecuador, and Bolivia, used advanced drone surveillance, AI mapping, pheromone fences, and terra-adaptive architecture to create buffer zones where herbivores roamed under supervision and carnivores were tracked with biochips and guided migratory corridors. These nations became hubs of medical research, biodiversity recovery, and underground diplomacy, negotiating prisoner swaps, genetic data trades, and truce pacts between rival human enclaves and predatory dino packs. In contrast, Dominion states formed from the ashes of heavily militarized countries and breakaway provincial armies, using gene-harvesting labs, mercenary fleets, and fortress citadels to control territory through fear and force. They established biosmith factories that engineered raptors for reconnaissance, ankylosaur mechs for armored breaching, and flyer hybrids for sky patrols and bombing raids. Their capitals were ringed with scorched earth kill zones, motion-triggered turrets, and underground silos holding cryo-frozen war beasts ready for deployment. These regimes ran black markets in embryos, toxins, and hybrid mercenaries, trading with pirate fleets, rogue scientists, and collapsing city-states in exchange for fuel, metals, and nuclear tech. Some Dominion generals even auctioned off captured sanctuaries to corporations, or extremist cults that worshipped apex predators as divine, arbiters of natural justice. Then came the hybrid, sovereignties, territories not fully controlled by humans but co-governed with or indirectly, influenced by dinosaurs and engineered species. In parts of the Congo Basin, Amazon rainforest, Papua highlands, outback interiors, and Siberian taiga, humans formed tribal tech alliances with herds, packs, or solitary apex guardians using biotelemetry, vocal mimicry, and ritual signaling to negotiate shared land rights, hunting seasons, and predator corridors. These societies abandoned the Old World's obsession with skyscrapers and highways, instead building vertical eco-havens woven into cliffs, trees, and caves, camouflaged with plant skin composites and fungal mesh resistant to hybrid detection. Some called themselves the New Primal Tribes, others the Children of the Second Earth, and they believed the fall of old nations marked the dawn of symbiosis rather than extinction. Meanwhile, corporations once bound by law transformed into sovereign entities with their own armies, currencies, and bio-enriched citadels. InGen's surviving branches merged with Helix Core and Ardentis to form the Gene Dominion conglomerate, headquartered in a floating arcology fortress constructed above what was once the Philippine Trench, protected by domesticated marine reptiles and autonomous drone sentinels. BioShell Logistics commandeered island chains and converted them into Jurassic trade ports, where smugglers, diplomats, mercenaries, and hackers exchanged embryos, hybrid organs, exosuit tech, and next-gen DNA vaults. Entire seas became patrolled by pirate navies riding armored barges escorted by genetically modified ichthyosaurs trained to ram enemy submarines and sever undersea cables. In Europe and North Africa, the crumbled Schengen region gave rise to the Alpine Free Enclave, the Iberian Refuge Pact, and the Saharan Rift Coalition, each with their own strategies of containment, coexistence, or extermination. The Mediterranean became a fractured gauntlet of floating sanctuaries, abandoned resort archipelagos, and underwater hybrid nests invisible to sonar due to evolved biocamouflage. Across Asia, the collapse of central governments splintered megastates into dozens of micronations. The Himalayan skywalkers who built cliffside cities guarded by gliding pterosaurs, the Mekong tide holds where villages floated on bioengineered reed platforms protected by domesticated semi-aquatic herbivores, the Neo-Steppe Khaganate where velociraptor-mounted cavalry patrolled grassland trade routes, and the Pacific Ember Councils that dwelled in volcanic caves stabilized with geothermal tech and symbiotic fungi. Communications infrastructure eroded, replaced by drone messengers, encrypted sky beacon relays, and migrating AI servers hidden in mobile convoys. Currency lost value, replaced by barter in food rations, genetic samples, ammunition, energy cells, medical serums, and rare earth metals. Education shifted from classrooms to survival academies teaching children how to read animal tracks, operate shock lances, repair exo-rigs, decode pheromone trails, and negotiate with both human and reptilian powers. Religious movements morphed into dino-centric cults preaching extinction, harmony, or evolutionary rebirth, while Black Ops councils recruited hybrid whisperers who could influence pack dynamics and predict stampedes before satellites could detect them. As territories stabilized under these new orders, diplomatic summits took place not in capital parliaments, but in hardened biodomes, hollowed-out mountains, and neutral sky platforms guarded by both human soldiers and tamed hybrids. Treaties covered not just land rights, water allocation, and migration corridors, but embryo ownership, hybrid tech exchange limits, predator strike protocols, anti-poaching enforcement, and sanctuary recognition status. Yet peace remained fragile, as rogue enclaves, pharaoh hybrid outbreaks, and Dominion incursions constantly tested alliances, and any failed negotiation risked a chain reaction sending herds crashing into settlements or unleashing bioengineered carnivores across disputed sectors. As the re-emergence of dinosaurs shattered the delicate framework of the modern world, the governments that once boasted stability, authority, and global influence began to disintegrate under the relentless pressure of crises they were neither structurally nor psychologically prepared to confront, because when cities fell silent under the thunder of prehistoric footsteps and communications blacked out across entire regions due to attacks on infrastructure, the illusion of centralized power evaporated faster than any policy could adapt, and within weeks the promises made by presidents, prime ministers, parliaments, and defense ministers collapsed into fragmented broadcasts, emergency evacuations, contradictory orders, and regionally conflicting military responses that only accelerated the breakdown of trust and the reversion to local survival networks. And while old-world superpowers struggled to maintain even the perception of control, their navies were forced to abandon major ports after aquatic predators like mosasaurs and newly mutated marine reptiles began surfacing near shipping lanes, leading to the shutdown of trade routes that had once sustained entire populations and economies, which in turn triggered famine, riots, looting, and the collapse of currencies that lost relevance in a world where food preservation, energy storage, and territorial shelter dictated value far more than paper money or digital credit ever could. And as national defenses attempted to repel carnivore incursions using airstrikes, drones, tranquilizer deployments, and electrified perimeter walls, the sheer scale, adaptability, and geographic spread of the dinosaur presence made containment efforts inefficient and unsustainable, draining resources until governments either withdrew to smaller fortified capitals or dissolved entirely into silence as chain-of-command links broke down, leaving soldiers scattered, bureaucrats powerless, and citizens improvising their own systems of governance in the vacuum left behind. And this decentralization birthed a staggering variety of new power structures ranging from technologically equipped arcologies in former megacities to agrarian enclaves repurposing ancient fortresses, from airborne communes relying on Zeppelin-like carriers to desert caravans operating under bio-camouflage tech that masked their heat signatures from predators that hunted by scent and movement. And some of the most strategic locations were those surrounded by mountain ranges, islands with natural water barriers, or colder territories that limited dinosaur mobility, creating safe zones that became hubs for emergent governments built not on national identity but on immediate functionality, resource management, and mutual survival compacts, which frequently included alliances between scientists, engineers, ex-military forces, medics, farmers, and innovators repurposing fragments of old-world technology to build fences upgraded with motion sensors, early warning sonic grids, and AI-assisted tracking systems that monitored dinosaur migration patterns using the last remaining satellites still operable, after orbital decay and system neglect started wiping out space-based assets that were never designed to handle decades. Without maintenance crews or funding, and as new factions solidified, some adopted names reminiscent of the old states to maintain psychological continuity, like the Pacific Human Accord, the Alpine Refuge Council, or the Eastern Continental Federation, while others chose entirely new identities unbound by past politics, such as the Sanctuary Syndicate, the High Ridge Sovereignty, the Maritime Mosaic, and the Genetic Frontier Coalition, and these groups varied not only in philosophy but in their stance toward dinosaurs, with some aiming purely for isolation and avoidance, others experimenting with domestication and biocommunication, and still others investing in hybrid genetic warfare to both retaliate and deter, creating a moral divide that often turned violent when ideological disagreements escalated into skirmishes over territory rich in resources or positioned near migratory choke points that offered strategic advantages for survival or trade. And in the absence of old alliances like NATO, the UN, or the African Union, communication between enclaves relied on relay drones, encoded radio bursts, courier gliders, and sometimes even messenger teams traveling along perilous but known routes, marked by safe zones and emergency bunkers established by humanitarian remnants that survived long enough to pass on the torch to the next generation. And those born after the collapse saw the world not as one shattered by disaster, but as one completely rewritten, where city limits were no longer defined by highways and borders, but by the frequency of dinosaur sightings, the availability of fresh water, and the proximity of ancient infrastructures like hydro dams, solar fields, and subterranean transit tunnels that could be repurposed into shelter networks, growing chambers or arsenal vaults depending on the ruling council's priorities. And as decades passed, the idea of traditional nations faded from memory, replaced by a new geopolitical map drawn not with ink, but with instinct, adaptation, and necessity, where power came not from historical legacy, but from the ability to negotiate with nature's resurgence and weaponize whatever remained of biotechnology, robotics, and energy systems without attracting predators that might crush an entire settlement in a single night if alarmed, disturbed or lured by noise, light, or prey scarcity elsewhere and in some territories. Charismatic leaders emerged, former scientists, military officers, climate refugees, or even teenage prodigies, whose ability to unify scattered groups under survival codes, rationing systems, and collaborative defense strategies transformed scattered survivors into thriving populations that built towering tree cities above jungle canopies, subterranean hive networks under old urban grids, and floating platforms along river deltas fortified with retractable barriers and stealth mist dispersal that confused flying reptiles. And while some enclaves enforced strict isolation, refusing trade or interaction for fear of espionage, infection, or territorial betrayal, others formed proto-diplomatic councils committed to exchanging medicinal knowledge, seed vault contents, genetic data, and migration intel in hopes of charting a future that did not revolve around the constant threat of extinction at the hands of creatures unconcerned with negotiations, borders, or politics. And within this new world emerged stories of unexpected alliances, like marine communities training plesiosaur descendants to tow floating shield farms, tundra colonies that coexisted near docile herbivore herds whose grazing patterns helped clear snow-crusted feeding zones for both species, and canyon settlements that carved enormous mirrored panels into cliffsides to disorient night-stalking predators with reflected starlight, all while harnessing geothermal vents to power their defense grids. And these innovations drew the attention of roaming clans and displaced populations who sought refuge, sometimes peacefully and sometimes through siege, leading to the rise of hybrid city-states that had to negotiate between openness and survival, diplomacy and enforcement, and every decision carried the weight of existential risk because a single security breach could invite disaster in the form of a rampaging predator or a rival enclave, seeking to bolster its numbers by absorbing or enslaving another group. And over time, historians, or what remained of them, began to document the transformation in fragments stored on solar drives, handwritten archives, engraved polymer sheets, and neural backups implanted in collective memory guilds tasked with preserving knowledge in case another collapse severed the fragile networks that connected human strongholds. And through these records emerged the understanding that the fall of old governments was not merely a political event, but a planetary correction, a reshuffling of balance from a species that once assumed permanence to one now struggling to justify its place alongside resurrected rulers of a bygone era. And within this humbling recognition, the rise of Dino-era nations represented not nostalgia for lost power, but an evolution of human identity driven by adaptation rather than dominance, where governance meant survival engineering instead of bureaucratic ritual. Citizenship was defined by contribution rather than birthright, and leadership belonged to those who could read the land, predict storm migrations, decode dinosaur behaviors, or invent technologies that worked in silent harmony with a world teeming with ancient life. And as the patchwork of new civilizations formed a mosaic across continents, rumors persisted that deep within the equatorial jungles, volcanic archipelagos, and abandoned technological ruins lay enclaves so advanced and secretive that they had learned not only to coexist with dinosaurs, but to harness them genetically, telepathically, or symbiotically, crafting a future where humanity did not just survive the collapse of old nations, but transcended them to become something entirely new. Neither conqueror nor prey, but a redefined force woven into the fabric of a world reborn under the shadow and majesty of creatures resurrected from prehistory. As the reemergence of dinosaurs shattered the delicate framework of the modern world, the governments that once boasted stability, authority, and global influence began to disintegrate under the relentless pressure of crises they were neither structurally nor psychologically prepared to confront, because when cities fell silent under the thunder of prehistoric footsteps and communications blacked out across entire regions due to attacks on infrastructure, the illusion of centralized power evaporated faster than any policy could adapt. And within weeks, the promises made by presidents, prime ministers, parliaments, and defense ministers collapsed into fragmented broadcasts, emergency evacuations, contradictory orders, and regionally conflicting military responses that only accelerated the breakdown of trust and the reversion to local survival networks. And while old-world superpowers struggled to maintain even the perception of control, their navies were forced to abandon major ports after aquatic predators like mosasaurs and newly mutated marine reptiles began surfacing near shipping lanes, leading to the shutdown of trade routes that had once sustained entire populations and economies, which in turn triggered famine, riots, looting, and the collapse of currencies that lost relevance in a world where food preservation, energy storage, and territorial shelter dictated value far more than paper money or digital credit ever could. And as national defenses attempted to repel carnivore incursions using airstrikes, drones, tranquilizer deployments, and electrified perimeter walls, the sheer scale, adaptability, and geographic spread of the dinosaur presence made containment efforts inefficient and unsustainable, draining resources until governments either withdrew to smaller fortified capitals or dissolved entirely into silence as chain-of-command links broke down, leaving soldiers scattered, bureaucrats powerless, and citizens improvising their own systems of governance in the vacuum left behind. And this decentralization birthed a staggering variety of new power structures ranging from technologically equipped arcologies in former megacities to agrarian enclaves repurposing ancient fortresses, from airborne communes relying on Zeppelin-like carriers to desert caravans operating under bio-camouflage tech that masked their heat signatures from predators that hunted by scent and movement. And some of the most strategic locations were those surrounded by mountain ranges, islands with natural water barriers, or colder territories that limited dinosaur mobility, creating safe zones that became hubs for emergent governments built not on national identity but on immediate functionality, resource management, and mutual survival compacts, which frequently included alliances between scientists, engineers, ex-military forces, medics, farmers, and innovators repurposing fragments of old-world technology to build fences upgraded with motion sensors, early warning sonic grids, and AI-assisted tracking systems that monitored dinosaur migration patterns using the last remaining satellites still operable, after orbital decay and system neglect started wiping out. space-based assets that were never designed to handle decades. Without maintenance crews or funding, and as new factions solidified, some adopted names reminiscent of the old states to maintain psychological continuity, like the Pacific Human Accord, the Alpine Refuge Council, or the Eastern Continental Federation, while others chose entirely new identities unbound by past politics, such as the Sanctuary Syndicate, the High Ridge Sovereignty, the Maritime Mosaic, and the Genetic Frontier Coalition. And these groups varied not only in philosophy but in their stance toward dinosaurs, with some aiming purely for isolation and avoidance, others experimenting with domestication and biocommunication, and still others investing in hybrid genetic warfare to both retaliate and deter, creating a moral divide that often turned violent when ideological disagreements escalated into skirmishes over territory rich in resources or positioned near migratory choke points that offered strategic advantages for survival or trade. And in the absence of old alliances like NATO, the UN, or the African Union, communication between enclaves relied on relay drones, encoded radio bursts, courier gliders, and sometimes even messenger teams traveling along perilous but known routes, marked by safe zones and emergency bunkers established by humanitarian remnants that survived long enough to pass on the torch to the next generation. And those born after the collapse saw the world not as one shattered by disaster, but as one completely rewritten, where city limits were no longer defined by highways and borders, but by the frequency of dinosaur sightings, the availability of fresh water, and the proximity of ancient infrastructures like hydro dams, solar fields, and subterranean transit tunnels that could be repurposed into shelter networks, growing chambers or arsenal vaults depending on the ruling council's priorities. And as decades passed, the idea of traditional nations faded from memory, replaced by a new geopolitical map drawn not with ink, but with instinct, adaptation, and necessity, where power came not from historical legacy, but from the ability to negotiate with nature's resurgence and weaponize whatever remained of biotechnology, robotics, and energy systems without attracting predators that might crush an entire settlement in a single night if alarmed, disturbed or lured by noise, light, or prey scarcity elsewhere. And in some territories, charismatic leaders emerged, former scientists, military officers, climate refugees, or even teenage prodigies, whose ability to unify scattered groups under survival codes, rationing systems, and collaborative defense strategies transformed scattered survivors into thriving populations that built towering tree cities above jungle canopies, subterranean hive networks under old urban grids, and floating platforms along river deltas fortified with retractable barriers and stealth mist dispersal that confused flying reptiles. And while some enclaves enforced strict isolation, refusing trade or interaction for fear of espionage, infection, or territorial betrayal, others formed proto-diplomatic councils committed to exchanging medicinal knowledge, seed vault contents, genetic data, and migration intel in hopes of charting a future that did not revolve around the constant threat of extinction at the hands of creatures unconcerned with negotiations, borders, or politics. And within this new world emerged stories of unexpected alliances, like marine communities training plesiosaur descendants to tow floating shield farms, tundra colonies that coexisted near docile herbivore herds whose grazing patterns helped clear snow-crusted feeding zones for both species, and canyon settlements that carved enormous mirrored panels into cliff sides to disorient night-stalking predators with reflected starlight, all while harnessing geothermal vents to power their defense grids. And these innovations drew the attention of roaming clans and displaced populations who sought refuge, sometimes peacefully and sometimes through siege, leading to the rise of hybrid city-states that had to negotiate between openness and survival, diplomacy and enforcement, and every decision carried the weight of existential risk because a single security breach could invite disaster in the form of a rampaging predator or a rival enclave, seeking to bolster its numbers by absorbing or enslaving another group. And over time, historians, or what remained of them, began to document the transformation in fragments stored on solar drives, handwritten archives, engraved polymer sheets, and neural backups implanted in collective memory guilds tasked with preserving knowledge in case another collapse severed the fragile networks that connected human strongholds. And through these records emerged the understanding that the fall of old governments was not merely a political event, but a planetary correction, a reshuffling of balance from a species that once assumed permanence to one now struggling to justify its place alongside resurrected rulers of a bygone era. And within this humbling recognition, the rise of Dino-era nations represented not nostalgia for lost power, but an evolution of human identity driven by adaptation rather than dominance, where governance meant survival engineering instead of bureaucratic ritual. Citizenship was defined by contribution rather than birthright, and leadership belonged to those who could read the land, predict storm migrations, decode dinosaur behaviors, or invent technologies that worked in silent harmony with a world teeming with ancient life. And as the patchwork of new civilizations formed a mosaic across continents, rumors persisted that deep within the equatorial jungles, volcanic archipelagos, and abandoned technological ruins lay enclaves so advanced and secretive that they had learned not only to coexist with dinosaurs, but to harness them genetically, telepathically, or symbiotically, crafting a future where humanity did not just survive the collapse of old nations, but transcended them to become something entirely new, neither conqueror nor prey, but a redefined force woven into the fabric of a world reborn under the shadow and majesty of creatures resurrected from prehistory. As humanity was thrust into an age where dinosaurs reclaimed vast territories and the natural order reorganized itself without regard for human borders or ambitions, technology underwent a radical transformation, born not from corporate laboratories or peacetime research grants, but from desperation, scattered genius, and the instinctual need to adapt faster than extinction could catch up. And the sleek smartphones, luxury vehicles, and urban megaprojects of the old world were replaced by rugged, hybridized innovations forged in underground bunkers, airborne shelters, floating enclaves, reclaimed research stations, and desert tech warrens where engineers, scientists, mechanics, hackers, and survivalists combined remnants of pre-collapse tech with field improvisation to develop systems that prioritized silence, camouflage, early detection, non-disruptive energy use, and deterrence mechanics that could protect against creatures whose senses were often sharper and instincts far more ancient than the algorithms humans once relied on, leading to breakthroughs in multispectral cloaking fabrics, bioreactive armor plating derived from keratin and scaled tissue samples, motion-dampening exosuits built from scavenged military gear and graphene composites, and AI-driven scanning drones small enough to travel undetected through canopy layers and ruined cities to track dinosaur migration, nesting zones, and predator pack hierarchies without provoking an attack. And these drones often used thermal camouflage and pheromone masking tech developed from studying dinosaur respiratory chemistry, while some were equipped with sonic displacement modules that emitted low-frequency pulses to redirect large herbivores or disorient airborne reptilian hunters long enough to provide extraction. Time for scouting teams and field couriers moving between enclaves, and power systems shifted from centralized grids to decentralized microreactors, compressed hydrogen cells, geothermal collectors, static field batteries, and solar thread fabrics woven into clothing, tenting, and glider wings, enabling survival networks to exist off-grid without drawing attention, because noise and light pollution became as deadly as territorial incursion. And in walled city fortresses where remnants of old governments tried to hold on, massive retrofits turned skyscrapers into signal-jamming towers lined with stealth plating and retractable barrier shields that used magnetic resonance to deflect incoming attacks or deter curious predators. And transportation evolved into tracked crawler vehicles wrapped in adaptive mesh armor that mimicked environmental textures, while older electric cars were gutted, shielded, and modified with tread systems, silent propulsion rotors, and pheromone spray lines that masked exhaust trails to confuse scent-tracking species. And in some enclaves, magnetized rail skiffs glided, along repurposed subway tunnels or elevated tracks using compressed air bursts and kinetic charging stations built from salvaged turbines and wind funnels mounted atop ridge settlements, allowing covert movement of supplies, refugees, and research teams across terrain where open travel meant death. And alongside transportation came defense systems that did not depend on outdated firearms and explosive weaponry, which often attracted more dinosaurs than they repelled. So instead, defenders created harpoon-based restraining rigs, tranquilizer dart cannons with chemical agents tailored to the metabolic differences between species, gravity nets powered by auto-stabilizing anchors, and pulse wave emitters that stunned nervous systems without generating lethal noise or fire, and where larger threats like Tyrannosaurus rex variants or Spinosaurus descendants roamed. Strongholds developed perimeter fields of retractable spike towers, pressure-triggered sonic traps, and ground-level mist dispersal units that released dense vapor, laced with deterrent compounds synthesized from plant alkaloids and dino-derived hormone inhibitors discovered through biostudy labs operating deep in quarantine domes where scientists and medics worked to understand the creature's biology, immune systems, and communication patterns. And this research directly influenced the birth of hybrid innovation labs where survival tech intersected with genetic engineering, leading to experimental organisms bred to serve as living early warning systems, such as small biofused reptiles whose color shift patterns indicated proximity of larger predators or tracker raptor, hybrids implanted with neural mesh chips that allowed limited telemetric feedback to human observers, who used them like biological satellites. And while some enclaves condemned such practices as reckless or immoral echoes of the mistakes that led to the collapse, others embraced them as essential to staying ahead in a world where humanity no longer possessed uncontested dominance. And underwater settlements used sonar-veiling shells, kelp fiber domes anchored to seabeds, and glider pods with pressure-adaptive hulls to avoid detection from marine reptiles, while airborne refugees used Zeppelin citadels equipped with sky current turbines, lightning rod sails, and retractable hangar bays that launched silent-wing drones and glider scouts built from carbon weaves and flexible solar film capable of remaining aloft for weeks. And communication across these diverse havens relied on encrypted pulse code bursts transmitted through relay buoys, old satellite constellations, and line-of-sight beacon arrays hidden in mountain caves or disguised as rocky outcrops, creating a lattice of information exchange that replaced traditional military satellites and telecommunication networks. And survivalists who once were seen as fringe thinkers became invaluable as they designed traps using reclaimed scrap, decoy thermic statues to lure predators away from settlements, and rapid deploy shelters forged from rust-proof alloys and compressed insulation foam that could expand underground within minutes to form emergency bunkers equipped with oxygen scrubbers, heat sinks, and kinetic dampers to withstand trampling or tail strikes from massive creatures. And as tech evolved, humanity learned that the best defense was neither brute force nor evasion alone, but tactical harmony with the ecosystem. And some regions pioneered the concept of dinosaur corridor mapping, using drones, biosensors, and seismic plates to track herd migrations and feeding grounds, then adjusting human infrastructure to avoid intersecting those patterns, constructing suspended bridges above treetops, burrow networks beneath riverbeds, and delta platforms atop metal stilts embedded in reinforced coral formations. And to maintain balance, engineers and ecologists collaborated to develop pulse-frequency field lines that gently redirected migration paths without causing panic, using harmonics tuned to the auditory ranges of herbivores and predator species discovered through years of field data collection. And those same bioacoustic techniques influenced habitation design where walls, embedded with vibration-nullifying panels and noise dampening, floors prevented any detectable disturbance from betraying the presence of large populations. And in hybrid research enclaves, scientists integrated repurposed neural interface tech with dinosaur behavioral data to decode basic warning signals, interpack communication cues, and subtle territorial shifts, hoping to establish long-term coexistence strategies rather than perpetually living under siege. and the merging of tech and biology also gave rise to defensive flora, with gene-edited plants designed to emit repellent spores or infrared distortion haze whenever large predators approached, turning forests, gardens, and perimeter belts into living fortifications that could regenerate themselves and adapt over time. And even though many saw these measures as the pinnacle of human resilience, others believed the true breakthrough lay in transforming how humanity perceived threat. And in some collectives, augmented reality lenses replaced traditional surveillance, allowing scouts and citizens to see real-time overlays of known dinosaur heat signatures, approach vectors, and hybrid creature detections while maintaining blackout conditions, enabling silent evacuations or strategic decoys that led predators toward uninhabited terrain seeded with lure automata, robotic decoy units constructed from bone polymer, shells and programmed with escape path algorithms to prevent clustered destruction of habitats, and as generations passed, Dino-era innovation became the new norm instead of an emergency reflex, and children were taught from youth how to repair sound traps, calibrate camo suits, mix deterrent resin, and interpret tremor charts, and cities that once symbolized modern power became layered strongholds of living tech fused with prehistoric awareness, where the lines between nature and machine blurred under necessity, and the brilliance of old scientists merged with the raw ingenuity of scavengers and nomadic techsmiths who built new solutions from forgotten junk, downed satellites, abandoned power grids, old cargo planes, and bio-waste processing units re-engineered into nutrient recyclers. And the more the world adapted, the clearer it became that innovation in this era was not driven by competition or corporate expansion, but by the primal drive to coexist, outlast, and evolve in a world where failure to adapt meant annihilation beneath the claws, teeth, or territorial wrath of beings that had ruled the earth long before humanity dreamed of dominance. And though every region developed its own brand of defense and invention, the core principle remained the same everywhere. Survival depended not on rebuilding the old world but on engineering a new one that could withstand the roar of ancient life breathing down its neck. And in that reality, the legacy of human, as the old world crumbled under the thunder of resurrected giants and the certainties of civilization were ground into dust beneath claws, wings, and tails older than recorded time. Human culture did not vanish but morphed into something unrecognizable to those who lived before the Great Upheaval, because when the symbols of progress, parliaments, theme parks, universities, entertainment industries, sports arenas, stock markets, and skyscrapers lost their meaning in the face of mass evacuation and daily survival, people were forced to reconstruct identity not around nationality, class, fashion, or digital status, but around adaptability, territory awareness, shared labor, and the stories they whispered in the dark to keep hope alive as the forests, plains, swamps, and deserts filled again with the roars and nesting claims of creatures from eras when humans did not yet exist, and in the ruins of old cities where graffiti once promoted music tours and political slogans. New markings emerged painted in bioluminescent clay or charred resin, illustrating warnings about raptor paths, safe water tunnels, migration corridors, and sacred no-go zones where colossal herbivores gathered seasonally to birth their young. And this rudimentary but communal language replaced billboards and traffic signs, and in strongholds built atop cliffside terraces or subterranean networks carved from old subway systems and mining shafts, oral traditions became the backbone of social identity, with elders and memory keepers reciting accounts of the first roar when the world changed, the silent exodus, when millions abandoned coastal cities swallowed by aquatic beasts, and the night of ashen wings when flying predators dismantled communication towers and drone hubs, severing the last digital umbilical cords to the past and in many enclaves. Religion did not disappear but reshaped itself into syncretic belief systems that merged remnants of old faiths with reverence, fear, or philosophical fascination toward the dinosaurs, some calling them either divine judges reclaiming the earth from human arrogance or harbingers of a natural reset, or lost guardians awakened by the planet itself to correct the imbalance caused by centuries of exploitation and genetic tampering, and within cathedral ruins now converted into greenhouse sanctuaries or meeting halls lined with sonic-dampening ferns. People gathered not to worship a specific figure but to share silence, meditation, or chants designed to harmonize with the ambient calls of distant prehistoric life so as not to draw attention with unnatural rhythms, while other groups clung fiercely to the remnants of old scriptures and treated the dinosaurs not as divine or symbolic, but as trials to be endured before eventual restoration of the human world, though even they had to adapt rituals and prayers so they could be recited in whispers inside fortified chapels without alerting wandering scavenger packs or nocturnal flyers nesting in crumbled bell towers. And festivals once defined by fireworks and parades transformed into torchless gatherings where people honored survival anniversaries, migration victories, or the safe birth of children in secure zones without triggering the sound-sensitive predators that prowled nearby valleys. And children who grew up without video games. Celebrities, or theme parks, constructed their cultural identity around creature lore. Territory songs and lessons carved into hide scrolls made from genetically cultivated leather fibers, preserved in underground ink chambers that used plant-based dyes to record everything from medical knowledge, to escape routes to lullabies that taught them how to breathe silently and move in rhythmic patterns with the Earth's vibrations so that they did not attract attention from predators that hunted by tremor detection. And art evolved from being decorative or commercial into deeply practical and spiritual expression. Murals on cliff walls depicted the patterns of migration, the silhouettes of apex predators, and the heroic rescues of clans who transported infants across wetlands while ankylosaurus herds stampeded through the riverbeds. And songs were no longer love ballads or anthems but rhythmic breathing guides, alarm codes, and memory chants that preserved knowledge of safe cave systems, edible fungi, or the unique roars that indicated mating season versus territorial aggression. And even storytelling itself changed as bards and storytellers now doubled as scouts or behavioral translators who recounted encounters with dinosaurs in vivid detail so others could learn to read tail movements, eye dilation, nostril flares, or vibration pulses in water to detect how close danger was. And in the absence of internet culture, fashion and identity markers drew from functionality first. Camo-woven cloaks stitched with fungus thread that masked human scent, jewelry carved from shed dinosaur teeth or fossilized bark used not for decoration but for signaling group allegiance or trade capability, and body paint made from clay mixed with deterrent herbs applied in patterns to confuse heat sensors of certain predators or to silently identify one's role in the enclave, such as scouts, healers, builders, gliders, historians, or biomechanists. And because travel across open land or sky was perilous, entire communities developed into micro-societies with distinct dialects, customs, and mythic interpretations of the dinosaurs around them, with some believing the reappearance of each species corresponded to an elemental force: stormcallers for flying reptiles, earthshakers for titanic sauropods, blood shadows for raptors, and deep memory guardians for colossal marine beasts, while others rejected mysticism entirely in favor of rational survivalism, but still developed rituals around tech maintenance, territory rotations, and annual silent night vigils during migratory peak seasons. And identity itself became rooted less in personal ambition and more in collective endurance, as each individual's worth was measured by how they contributed to fortification upkeep, food sourcing, water filtration, evacuation drills, and the preservation of intergenerational knowledge that could not be stored digitally due to power scarcity and signal risks. And even in more advanced enclaves that maintained partial AI systems, holographic libraries, and gene labs, culture adapted to ensure children were trained in old tech literacy so they could repair century-old machines with improvised parts rather than waiting for non-existent supply chains. And while trauma was omnipresent, humanity did not forget how to form bonds. Marriages were officiated not in courts or temples but under reinforced canopies or beneath seismic shields after both partners underwent survival compatibility rites. and funerals no longer followed cremation or burial norms, but sometimes involved sky rafts carrying remains downriver or concealed compost vaults to prevent scent detection by predators. And as decades turned survival into tradition and fear into wisdom, identity evolved beyond the binary of hunter and prey into something more complex, a recognition that to exist in the age of dinosaurs meant becoming part of a new mythos where humans were neither masters of Earth nor its forgotten relics but adaptable participants in an ancient cycle reawakened. And amid the ruins of bookstores and synagogues and malls and stadiums, children played quietly in camouflaged courtyards with bone-carved toys shaped like both humans and dinosaurs, not as monsters and victims but as cohabitants of a shared fate. And artists etched tales of balance and loss onto fungal parchment that glowed faintly in the dark so stories could be read without artificial light. And from tundra colonies to desert caravans to sky haven flotillas, people carried songs and symbols that reminded them they were survivors of a world humbled but not erased. And even those with access to partial data archives and preserved media no longer idolized celebrities or political icons but revered nameless builders. Rescuers, scouts, parents, med-techs, and knowledge keepers who ensured their enclaves endured another year under the shadow and bellow of beasts older than memory. And faith itself, whether spiritual, cultural, or personal, became less about salvation and more about integration, about learning to walk the earth with a reverence shaped not by fear alone, but by awareness that humanity's identity had evolved into something leaner, quieter, inventive, and deeply bound to a world it could no longer dominate but could still navigate with resilience, cooperation, and unbreakable will. And though nostalgia sometimes flickered in stories of past lives filled with music festivals, cafes, movies, and bright cities, new generations saw those tales the way ancient humans once saw legends of Atlantis or Eden. Fascinating, tragic, and impossibly distant and in their place. They forged a cultural reality where survival was art, adaptation was heritage, and identity was written not in flags or passports but in how well one could listen to the earth, interpret its dangers, and protect the fragile flame of humanity in a world rumbling once more with the footsteps of giants. As fear transformed from a temporary response into a permanent atmospheric condition, and the psychological framework of humanity underwent a metamorphosis as profound as any biological shift recorded in history. People no longer defined sanity by the ability to ignore death, but by the capacity to coexist mentally with its constant proximity. Because minds that once worried about career milestones, social validation, and digital reputation now recalibrated around the rhythm of footsteps in the underbrush, the direction of shadows at dusk, the patterns of distant roars that replaced the forgotten hum of highways, and memory itself evolved into a survival mechanism rather than a sentimental archive as new generations, born after the re-emergence of dinosaurs, had no experiential roots in the world of neon skylines, touchscreen devices, or celebrity culture, so their dreams, fears, humor, imagination, and emotional wiring formed around cautionary tales of cliffside nests, pack-hunting nocturnal carnivores, and the songs of amphibious leviathans echoing through flooded subway tunnels. And this cognitive shift did not produce a weaker or desensitized species, but a more intensely aware one. Because where past humans developed anxiety over abstract futures and financial debts, new enclaves trained children to control breath, regulate heartbeat, and interpret silence like a sixth sense, turning hypervigilance into instinctive intelligence. And psychological trauma did not disappear but was collectivized, processed through communal rituals of whisper sharing where people recited their nightmares and close calls not in the language of despair but as tactical memory, encoding each emotional wound with practical knowledge about nesting seasons, camouflage errors, or the subtle gestures that could calm a grazing trike beast enough to avoid a stampede. And elders taught that forgetting was a form of death because every individual experience, successful or tragic, contributed to the cognitive evolution of the community. And dreams, once abstract reflections of stress, became cartographic signals where survivors unconsciously mapped predator territory, dangerous paths, or the locations of safe oxygen vents in deep shelters. And shamans or neuroguides interpreted not spiritual omens but recurring, mental imagery tied to seismic shifts or migration, patterns that science once tracked with satellites but was now sensed through the collective unconscious of those who had lived with the ground, trembling beneath their feet since infancy. And mental resilience became the greatest wealth, replacing entertainment, social status, and even nutrition in psychological priority. So those who could remain calm while hearing branches snap under heavy reptilian claw, or while feeling cavern walls tremble under the mass of a passing titan, were considered pillars of society. Not out of bravado, but because their presence stabilized group responses and prevented panic cascades that could cost dozens of lives. And memory transmission shifted away from written journals and digital records to multisensory training grounded in repetition, role play, and environmental immersion, where children learned not through lectures but by crawling through echo chambers where recorded roars were played to train auditory recognition, or by participating in silent night walks guided by elders who sensed atmospheric changes before storms or predator migrations, and where libraries once held books about psychology. Now memory vaults stored scent-coated tapestries and carved stone labyrinths that taught directional awareness and stress regulation. And the concept of childhood innocence reshaped itself not around ignorance of danger, but around the absence of denial. Because denial was a psychological luxury extinct in a world where delusion meant leaving a gate unlatched or forgetting to mask one's scent near the borders of a hunting ground. And love, rather than being weakened by fear, intensified through interdependence, as emotional bonds formed not through romance or convenience, but through years of coordinated survival, where trust was not abstract but proven each time someone held a collapsing support beam, carried another across a flooded path, or guided an injured friend into a hollow before a pack converged. An attachment no longer eroded under stress but crystallized into a fierce loyalty that passed. Societies might have called tribal or primal, but was in truth an advanced psychological adaptation to a world where collective focus replaced individual distraction, and future planning took on a new cognitive dimension, where elders and strategists simulated not decades of economic projections or political shifts, but breeding cycles of predators, spore blooms of toxic flora, and the migratory timing of flying reptiles that used sky thermals once reserved for transport drones, and even technological enclaves that retained servers and databanks found, themselves reprogramming AI systems to think not like market analysts or urban planners but like interspecies, tacticians who could calculate psychological stress thresholds in relation to proximity alarms, so that communities were alerted not only when danger was near, but when emotional fatigue reached levels that compromised decision-making. And memory was preserved not merely for nostalgia, but as a blueprint for adaptive psychology, with murals and bone etchings depicting not just triumphs over death, but also moments where someone survived by playing dead, dropping supplies to distract a pursuer, or finding calm in the middle of auditory chaos. And the psychological evolution of humanity was perhaps most visible in how children processed loss. Because rather than collapsing beneath the grief of a fallen guardian or companion, they integrated the memory into ritual songs that named the location, time, and circumstances so no death was meaningless. And emotional healing looked nothing like old-world therapy but emerged in acts of restoration, rebuilding breached walls, reweaving camouflage nets, replanting medicinal fungus gardens, or sitting beside the recently bereaved in shared silence while the wind carried the distant bellows of ancient creatures marking territory under a sky cleared of pollution but darkened by instinct. And as generations layered their minds with inherited caution and inventive courage, the human psyche branched into new pathways of perception, with some individuals developing an almost extrasensory ability to detect approaching predators through vibrations others could not feel, or by reading micro-expressions in flocking birds that reacted seconds earlier to ground tremors, and these perceptive outliers, once dismissed as superstitious or delusional, were now revered as sentinel minds who guided caravans and scouted silent zones, And psychologists, where they still existed, became less like doctors and more like neural cartographers and trauma translators who measured community stability by the rhythm of breathing during long marches or the tone of whispered lullabies inside bunkered nurseries. And as the biological world continued to reshape human mental architecture through threat, awe, and adaptation, the concept of the future itself evolved from a distant dream to a continuum of present awareness. And though many wondered if one day humanity might reclaim a semblance of the old world with cities and light and noise, others believed that such a return was neither possible nor desirable, because the psychological evolution triggered by the return of dinosaurs had forged a new blueprint for existence, one where fear no longer signified weakness but awareness, where memory served not as fuel for anxiety but as the lifeline of progress, and where identity was no longer tied to dominance but to the quiet, enduring intellect of a species that refused extinction by reshaping its very mind to live beneath the gaze and roar of giants older than time. Giants older than time. As the world settled into an uneasy rhythm where prehistoric instincts and human adaptability coexisted in an evolving equilibrium of survival, memory, innovation, and instinct, the question of legacy shifted from monuments, digital archives, and political borders to the living continuity of those born into a planet reshaped by titanic creatures that cared nothing for history, law, or ambition, and for future generations the past world of electricity grids, towers of glass, commercial flights, stadiums, and streaming media became less a source of nostalgia and more a half-mythic story whispered only when it taught something practical. Because legacy no longer meant preserving culture in museums or textbooks, but ensuring that knowledge, resilience, and adaptive intelligence passed through bloodlines, communal learning, and lived experience before the next migration of predators tested the fragility of settlements built between riverbeds and cliffside refugees once carved for dinosaurs themselves. And families did not measure prosperity in currency or land ownership, but in how many members could track raptor trails, harvest fungus protein, repair vibration sensors, or predict storms based on the flutter patterns of lowland flyers whose wingspans could block the sun. And children did not grow up dreaming of careers in sports or media or finance, but of becoming air scouts, ridgewalkers, enclosure architects, whisper trackers, or memory keepers who absorbed the stories of fallen guardians and near-extinction knights so that their people would not repeat unseen mistakes, and bloodlines themselves became less about biological inheritance and more about chosen kinship among those who relied on each other through chemical droughts, volcanic ash seasons, and migratory surges of amphibious titans whose calls could send entire valleys into stampeding chaos. And the fate of future generations hinged not on the return of old comforts but on the preservation and evolution of a new worldview that accepted humans as part of a layered ecosystem rather than its uncontested rulers, and elders whose eyes had once seen airplanes and neon signs and steel highways no longer mourned their disappearance, but measured humanity's progress by its ability to exist, without fracturing mentally under the roar of a creature older than civilization itself. And archives of the New Age were not built from paper or silicon but from carved stone rings, woven memory tapestries, and encoded fungi gardens whose growth patterns reflected stories of safe zones, extinction scares, and diplomatic truces fought not between nations but between desperate human enclaves negotiating migration routes to avoid drawing the wrath of territory-claiming prehistoric beasts. And future generations would not study world wars or aerospace triumphs, but the era when governments fell and new tribes, city-states, corporation enclaves, and cooperative sanctuaries emerged to face a reality where every failure to adapt meant feeding an apex predator that regarded tanks as insects and helicopters as fleeting prey. And the legacy of humanity became defined not by the ability to conquer land, but by the ability to coexist, conceal, collaborate, and calibrate survival across climates, terrains, and species that had no memory of human dominance and no interest in humanity's former glory. And the stories told around geothermal fires did not romanticize the past, but used it as a contrast to illustrate how arrogance once blinded the species to the consequences of genetic resurrection, ecosystem disruption, and experimental hubris that shattered the illusion of safety in laboratories and boardrooms where people once believed nature could be patented, modified, and contained. And as children listened to the tales of the fall of megacities and the shattering of fossil-fueled empires, they did not weep, but absorbed the lessons written in the bones of both prey and predator that littered the borders of reclaimed territories. And their songs were not laments, but coded chants embedding sonic maps of feeding grounds, storm shelters, and sky shadow-safe corridors where aerial reptiles rarely flew. And love stories of the new era did not revolve around destiny or chance, but around bonds forged while crawling under a collapsed transit tunnel with a wounded elder, or sharing the last ration of dried root while listening for the breath of a sleeping carnivore meters away behind broken concrete. And birth rituals welcomed infants not with celebration of innocence, but with vows from the community to train their senses, strengthen their minds, and prepare them not for fearlessness, but for intelligent fear management that allowed survival without paralysis. Because the legacy of future generations would not be measured in skyscrapers or satellites, but in the quiet continuation of heartbeats beneath skies patrolled by thunder lizards and marshland, tyrants whose roars replaced thunder as the planet's most dominant sound. And humanity's fate would not be decided in a single climactic war or a miraculous resurgence of technology, but in the daily acts of adaptation, the passing of knowledge through gesture and story, the forging of alliances with other enclaves across former borders, and the acceptance that the Earth reborn was no longer a stage for human supremacy, but a cradle of coexistence where the strongest legacy was not domination, but endurance, not conquest, but memory, not nostalgia, but evolution. And whether the distant descendants of the survivors would one day re-engineer cities camouflaged into cliff faces, or live entirely underground, or even bond symbiotically with herbivorous titans for protection, their truest inheritance would be the psychological and cultural transformation born from the day dinosaurs returned not as exhibits or experiments, but as the rightful children of a world humanity only borrowed. And as the epochs turned and the line between ancient and modern dissolved into a singular timeline of coexistence, humanity's greatest legacy would be its refusal to vanish, its willingness to reshape its destiny without pretending the planet belonged only to them, and its ability to teach each newborn not the lie of safety but the truth of adaptation. So that long after the last memory of electricity fades and the last remnants of old-world languages dissolve into hybrid dialects of warning and wisdom, the story of humankind will continue not as the species that ruled the earth, but as the one that learned, at the edge of extinction, to live with giants. To live with giants. In the shadow of a planet reshaped by titanic reptiles and ecosystems older than recorded history, the last bastions of organized humanity did not vanish into extinction, but slipped beneath the surface of the world, into cavern networks, submerged metro systems, volcanic tunnel veins, desert catacombs, and mountain hollows once dismissed as geological anomalies or abandoned industrial remnants. And from these hidden enclaves a new breed of civilization arose, one not defined by digital infrastructure or political allegiance, but by the ruthless discipline of silence, scent masking, thermal camouflage, and acoustic engineering designed to remain undetectable by predators whose senses had evolved across millions of years of primal survival. And these underground societies did not operate as scattered refugees, but as strategic nodes of a reborn human network that used forgotten fiber tunnels, reworked radio frequencies, and bioluminescent fungal relay systems to communicate across continents without drawing the attention of surface-stalking titans or airborne leviathans whose roars could crack frozen lakes and shatter glass remnants in the ghost cities above. And in these subterranean strongholds, the concept of leadership evolved beyond titles and elections into a merit-based hierarchy where survival architects, tunnel cartographers, scent alchemists, vibration analysts, and memory guardians held the same weight once reserved for presidents, generals, and tech magnates. Because in a world where a single sound could invite annihilation from a surface-stalking carnivore capable of tearing through steel, authority was granted only to those whose instincts, decisions, and innovations had repeatedly saved lives, not those who once debated policy in air-conditioned towers now buried under vines, nests, and fossil dust. And the infrastructure of these enclaves grew into complex labyrinths that used natural rock insulation, ancient aquifers, geothermal vents, and fungus farms to sustain populations that could live for years without risking surfacing during migratory surges or mating frenzies of the giants above. And children raised in these underground civilizations learned to walk without echo, speak in breath tones, and navigate total darkness using fingertip maps etched into cavern walls coated with mineral dust that absorbed light and sound. And every enclave developed its own survival doctrine shaped by geography. Coastal sinkhole shelters built raft chambers that rose with floods and fell in drought seasons. Arctic tunnel havens carved beneath permafrost used thermal vents to avoid freezing while masking heat signatures from sky predators that mistook steam trails for prey. And desert vaults beneath dune seas created rotating sand shield gates designed to collapse instantly at detection, sealing off miles of tunnels with engineered silence so perfect even seismic trackers could not distinguish them from untouched Earth. And these underground societies did not merely hide, but adapted their technology to harmonize with the reborn planet, salvaging solar arrays only to repurpose their lenses for heat traps and wind-driven airflow regulators, melting down satellite debris to forge acoustic-dampening armor plates and gate hinges that made no friction sound, and reprogramming bashed communication drones into scent-mapping scouts that glided through ravines and canopy cracks carrying encoded pheromone signals instead of digital transmissions. And as generations passed the distinction between surface humans and underworld enclaves deepened into a psychological and physical divergence where those raised below ground developed heightened senses of tremor detection, oxygen modulation, low-light navigation, and silent social communication, while their historians preserved knowledge of the old world only in fragments, necessary to understanding past mistakes, not as nostalgia, but as cautionary memory carved into stone spirals that told of laboratories that resurrected beasts without contingency, corporations that commodified resurrection, and governments that collapsed when chaos shattered their illusion of control. And some enclaves trained elite surface runners known as dusk walkers who emerged only under specific atmospheric conditions, when predator scent cones shifted or thunder masked movement. And these scouts mapped ruins, harvested abandoned tech, retrieved lost knowledge cores, planted fungal radio roots in old cities, and sometimes shadowed herds of herbivorous titans to study migratory changes that signaled continental shifts in danger zones. And while some underground civilizations fought to simply endure, others dreamed of resurfacing not to reclaim dominion, but to rebuild in strategic harmony with the predators, learning which territories could be shared through distraction lures, feeding corridors, and migratory forecasting so that humanity could exist not as invasive species, but as a shadow civilization woven into the planet's natural pulse. And although old governments had fallen their remnants, data shards, flag remnants, collapsed parliaments, and submerged military bases, were studied only when they offered structural refuge, chemical resource, or tactical knowledge, because these new societies no longer worshipped the myth of centralized rule, but believed in distributed survival clusters connected through silence-coded alliances. And treaties between enclaves were sealed not with signatures or ceremonies, but with exchange of memory bearers who carried neural chants that stored entire histories, safety instructions, and conflict resolutions without needing paper or servers that could be detected or destroyed. And even as the world above rumbled with territorial battles between carnivores larger than freighters and airborne reptiles that nested in skyscrapers strangled by vines, the underground civilizations observed, calculated, and prepared for a slow reemergence over generations, one not driven by conquest but by coexistence and strategic invisibility. And some enclaves even experimented with bioengineering, symbiosis using spore networks that masked human scent, and redirected predator attention toward artificial decoy fields, built from decomposed drone parts and synthetic pheromones made in cavern labs by chemists who once studied perfume, and elders whispered that humanity's greatest advantage was not strength, speed, or weaponry, but the ability to reshape its strategies generation after generation without losing identity. And so the rebirth of human strategy in the underground world signaled not cowardice, but evolution, not retreat, but recalibration. Because legacy in the Dino era would not belong to the loudest or the strongest, but to the ones who mastered the art of vanishing while building the foundation of a future no longer blinded by arrogance. And as the children of the enclaves touched the carved walls where old world maps had been redrawn with new territories controlled by prehistoric rulers, they did not tremble with fear, but with the understanding that survival was no longer about defeating nature, but about becoming intelligent enough to navigate it unseen until the day came when humanity could rise again, not as conquerors, but as the hidden architects of a world shared with giants.